March 1945. Just weeks remained before the end of the war in Europe. When we think of this final phase of World War II and the German armed forces, the common impression is that the Wehrmacht had been reduced to exhausted and weakened divisions with virtually no offensive capability. The prevailing image is that the Germans were limited to a defensive role, trying to slow the relentless advance of Allied armies pushing into the heart of Germany from both the east and west. But was that really the case? On the Western Front in particular, under pressure to hold back the Soviet assault in the east, the German forces facing the American, British, Canadian, French, and Polish armies were indeed depleted and poorly equipped. The best equipment and the most elite units had been sent east to take part in the final German offensives in Hungary. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944 marked Germany's last major attack on this front and ended in another defeat. It also exposed serious flaws. The newly formed Volksgrenadier infantry divisions often lacked the experience and leadership of older units, leading to devastating casualties. Manpower and equipment shortages were further worsened by Hitler's refusal to allow Army Group B to withdraw to more defensible positions after the Anglo-American armies crossed the Rhine in March 1945, an error that sealed its fate in what became known as the Ruhr Pocket. This defeat cost Germany approximately 360,000 men, killed, wounded, or captured, and effectively ended all organized resistance on the Western Front. From this point on, the remaining German forces were on the brink, desperately trying to prevent the Western Allies from reaching the Elbe River, and ultimately, Berlin. Still, resistance in most sectors was minimal, leading Stalin to accuse Eisenhower of having made a secret deal with the Germans. This accusation stemmed from the fact that while the Eastern Front remained ferociously contested, German resistance in the West had all but collapsed. Yet even then, some German units were still willing to fight the Americans. What follows is an analysis of the last significant German attack on the Western Front, one that showed that even in the final days of the war, German forces remained dangerous and capable of tactical victories, despite the apparent low quality and poor equipment of their last military formations. One such unit was the Scharnhorst Infantry Division, among the last divisions formed as the Reich collapsed. It was created on March 30th, 1945, by merging the shattered remnants of the 340th and 167th Volksgrenadier divisions. Its infantry companies were largely composed of men from cadet schools in military district of Pfeffen, along with some available Luftwaffe personnel, many of whom were in fact decorated veterans who had been reassigned to the infantry. The division also included the remaining rifle company from the Potsdam Infantry Division. The Scharnhorst Division was structured as a so-called 1945 Infantry Division, a new type of unit that relied on concentrated firepower to make up for its lack of manpower. It was, in effect, the final evolutionary stage of the German division. The division was formed around 3 grenadier regiments. Around 80% of its troops were officer cadets, non-commissioned officer candidates, or trainees alongside their instructors. The term officer cadet can be misleading. While many were 17 or 18 years old, others were seasoned soldiers who had been sent for officer training. Many were decorated for bravery, and their instructors were often battle-hardened officers and NCOs. These experienced leaders knew how to organize and lead, ensuring that even the most inexperienced recruits quickly became effective soldiers, eager to prove themselves. The grenadier regiments were reasonably well equipped, particularly with light weapons and portable anti-tank arms. Most soldiers carried Mauser Kar 98 bolt-action rifles, while at least one company per battalion was armed with the revolutionary new SSTG 44 assault rifle. Fire support came from MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns, and the troops had ample supplies of Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. Each battalion was also equipped with mortars and a number of anti-tank guns distributed across the regiments. Armored support was vital, but at this point in the war, finding sufficient vehicles and fuel was a serious problem. The Scharnhorst division was assigned a tank destroyer unit consisting of 7 Hetzer tank destroyers. On paper, it should have numbered at least 15. In total, the division numbered fewer than 6,000 men, about half the size of a comparable American or British infantry division. It had little armor and very limited artillery support. In early April, American forces were advancing rapidly toward the Elbe River, the last major German defensive line in the west before reaching Berlin. On April 12, 1945, the Scharnhorst division, as part of the German 12th Army, was sent to establish defensive positions near the town of Barbie, midway between Magdeburg and Dessau, on the western bank of the Elbe. The day before, on April 11th, the Scharnhorst division had received reinforcements with the attachment of Armored Battalion 1170, equipped with around 30 assault guns, most of them Stoogie III models. At the same time, American forces were preparing to cross the Elbe at 3 different points in the region. The German 12th Army deployed the Scharnhorst and Ulrich von Hutten infantry divisions to hold the western bank near Dessau, while a 3rd division defended the eastern bank much farther north of Magdeburg, supported by local units. The defense of Magdeburg itself was supported by local Volkssturm battalions. Meanwhile, the U.S. 2nd Armored Division had established a small bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Elbe, south of the city. This bridgehead became the primary target of the 12th Army's commander, General Wenck, who ordered Brigadier General Heinrich Götz, commander of the Scharnhorst Division, to eliminate it as quickly as possible. Before dawn on April 13, 1945, a battalion from the 119th Infantry Regiment of the 30th U.S. Division crossed into the bridgehead, reinforcing the American position there with a total of 3 battalions. However, the engineers had not yet completed a pontoon bridge, which meant that tanks couldn't cross the river to support the infantry, leaving the Americans highly vulnerable to a German counterattack. At sunrise, German artillery fire intensified dramatically, using many of the heavy guns from Luftwaffe anti-aircraft batteries that defended Magdeburg. U.S. artillery responded, but with limited effect. The Americans requested fighter bomber support, but the request had to be denied. The advance had been so rapid that air support was now operating from airfields far behind the front lines. By the afternoon, U.S. engineers had managed to complete a pontoon bridge across the Elbe, but German shelling soon destroyed it. Under increasing pressure, Major General White, commander of the 2nd Armored Division, ordered a withdrawal from the bridgehead. Attention then shifted 4 kilometers upstream to a site where the original bridge had already been blown up by the Germans. 3 battalions of American infantry moved in, and by the morning of April 14th, elements of the 119th Infantry Regiment were able to cross the Elbe once again and establish another bridgehead. With this foothold secured, American forces began constructing bridges to bring tanks across the river. It was here, near Schönebeck, that the Scharnhorst Division launched its attack. A grenadier battalion, supported by assault guns, was ordered to strike the bridgehead. The Germans attacked at dawn, taking the Americans by surprise. At the bridgehead, the U.S. forces outnumbered the Germans by roughly 3-to-1, a ratio typically required by an attacking force for a successful assault. The Germans were going against that doctrine, attacking despite the odds. They advanced from Gommern, striking American positions in Elbenau, while a second group simultaneously attacked Grünewalde. The entire German force was organized as Kampfgruppe Ringelheim, named after its commander. The first target was the 3rd Battalion of the 119th Infantry Regiment, followed moments later by the 3rd Battalion of the 41st Armored Infantry Regiment. The men of the 119th reported they had scarcely any anti-tank weapons to fend off the German armored assault. Swiftly, the Germans obliterated the American defenders in the eastern sector of Elbenau, sowing panic in the town. German vanguard tanks were spotted and engaged, particularly by American artillery from the opposite riverbank, but they pressed forward undeterred. Meanwhile, the headquarters of the 2nd Armored Division promised to send tanks to reinforce the position. The second German assault struck the 3rd Battalion of the 41st Armored Infantry Regiment in Grünewalde shortly after the attack on Elbenau. It was a well-coordinated strike, signaling that the training instructors now leading the German assault knew their craft. The German armored force had broken through the 119th Infantry Regiment's positions and was now attacking the 41st's lines, scattering many American platoons. By 5 in the morning, the Allied defensive line in Grunewalde had also collapsed. The American soldiers had no choice but to retreat toward the river in stages, covering each other in turns. They had fought as hard as they could, but were gradually overwhelmed. Communications between battalions, companies, and platoons at the bridgehead broke down entirely. At one point, between 50 and 100 German infantrymen attacked southeast along the river, reaching the left rear of the command group of the 3rd Battalion of the 41st Armored Infantry Regiment, which consisted of about 20 officers and soldiers. The command personnel formed a defensive perimeter and fought back with 4 heavy machine guns and an 81 mm mortar, managing to push the Germans back north of Grunewalde. Finally, the American command issued orders to evacuate the bridgehead, directing all forces to fall back to Grunewalde to form a defensive perimeter and hold out. By 11:30 a.m., the 41st Armored Infantry Regiment's battalion had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force, with only isolated groups remaining. Engineers worked frantically to repair the ferry cable and the damaged ramp, but the cable was severed again by German artillery fire. The American perimeter in Grunewalde collapsed as companies withdrew in stages under covering fire from American tanks on the west bank of the Elbe. All who could be evacuated were gone by 4 in the afternoon. Yet, some soldiers managed to cross the river after nightfall. Casualties were heavy. Large numbers of Americans were reported dead or missing, many of whom had indeed perished. The Germans captured over 300 American soldiers. For the Scharnhorst division, destroying the American bridgehead was a significant victory, proving that even in the final weeks of World War II in Europe, makeshift German divisions could still inflict serious defeats on their enemy. In this case, the lack of anti-tank weapons and American armor at the bridgehead, coupled with the absence of air support, allowed the German tanks and infantry, handled with flexibility, to overwhelm an enemy force 3 times their size. Just days after this action, Hitler ordered Wenck to send most of his army to Berlin to confront the Soviet forces encircling the city. From that point, German resistance on the Elbe crumbled. In any case, as the Americans had no intention of advancing further toward Berlin, it was of little consequence. So, would you like to dive into the final German offensives, this time on the Eastern Front? You can find them in my book, The Wehrmacht's Last Offensives, Eastern Front 1945, with the link provided in the description. A big shout out to everyone, and I'll see you next Sunday. Until then.